In 1814, an unimaginable tragedy struck London's St Giles district, a flood of beer. A massive vat at the Moo and Company Brewery burst, unleashing over 1.4 million litres of beer into the streets. Buildings were demolished, and in the chaos, 8 lives were tragically lost, drowned or crushed by the force of the wave. This bizarre disaster shook the city, and though it seems almost surreal today, it serves as a grim reminder of how even the most unlikely accidents can bring devastation.
In the bustling streets of early 19th century London, beer was not just a drink, it was a staple of daily life. But in 1814, one brewery became the scene of a bizarre and tragic disaster. This is the story of the London beer flood, a freak accident that turned a neighborhood into a sea of ale, leaving destruction and death in its wake. It was October 17, 1814. The Moo and Company Brewery, located on Tottenham Court Road, was one of the largest in London. Within its walls, enormous wooden vats stood several stories tall, containing thousands of gallons of beer. One vat, in particular, held an astonishing 3,500 barrels of fermenting porter. For months, pressure had been building inside the vat. The wooden staves groaned under the immense weight of the liquid inside. Then, without warning, disaster struck. The metal hoops that reinforced the vat snapped, and the enormous container burst open with a deafening roar. The explosion was catastrophic. Over 320,000 gallons of beer surged out of the brewery, sweeping through the narrow streets of London like a tidal wave. The force of the flood was so powerful that it smashed through brick walls, demolishing buildings, and trapping anyone unfortunate enough to be in its path. Residents of the nearby slums, many of whom lived in poverty, had no time to escape. The flood of beer tore through homes, cellars, and pubs. Entire streets were submerged in a river of dark porter. Tragically, 8 people, including women and children, lost their lives, either by drowning, being crushed under debris, or suffocating in the aftermath. The sheer scale of the disaster was unimaginable. A flood of beer sounds almost comical, but in the cramped, overcrowded streets of 19th century London, it was deadly. The slums surrounding the brewery were the hardest hit, and the devastation was made worse by the poverty of the area. News of the beer flood spread quickly throughout London. While some papers treated the event with a degree of humor, others recognized the tragic loss of life and property. Families of the victims mourned, while others in the city were stunned by the sheer oddity of the disaster. After the flood, the Moo Brewery faced legal challenges. An inquiry was held to determine whether the brewery could be held responsible for the disaster. Astonishingly, the courts ruled that the beer flood was an act of God, a freak accident that no one could have predicted or prevented. As a result, the brewery was not held liable for the deaths or the destruction. Today, the site of the Moo and Company Brewery is part of a bustling modern neighborhood. No signs remain of the tragic event that occurred there over 2 centuries ago. But the memory of the beer flood of 1814 endures, both as a bizarre chapter in London's history and as a reminder of how fragile life was in the industrial age. In the aftermath of the flood, stories emerged of both tragedy and heroism. Survivors recounted how they had been swept off their feet, while others rushed into the rising waters to save neighbors trapped under rubble or pinned by debris. While the beer flood may seem like an absurd tragedy, it highlights the dangers of early industrialization. Huge vats, improper safety regulations, and poor living conditions meant that even everyday businesses could become the sources of unimaginable disasters. The London beer flood of 1814 was a strange and devastating event. In a city built on trade, commerce, and industry, the cost of progress was often paid by the poorest citizens. And while this disaster may have been an accident, it left a lasting mark on the history of London and serves as a curious, if tragic, chapter in the story of industrialization. The London Beer Flood, 1814. An industrial accident, a tragedy, and a reminder of the human cost of progress. Subscribe, give thumbs up and press the bell for any update.